Hello Internet, welcome back to Tromsø Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the ever-expanding universe, about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. Today we are talking about this book, Perfection, by Vincenzo Latronico. In my introduction, I always say that I talk about books that I find interesting or enjoy. I think this one falls more into the interesting category. It's very thought-provoking, it's extremely well executed. The degree to which I actually enjoy it as a novel, I haven't really decided, but I think, how much I like a thing is maybe the least interesting thing I can say about it. Perfection came out in 2025. It was written in Italian. All of Latronico's books are written in Italian, but it was translated by Sophie Hughes, and it seems to me that the translation must have come out at the same time as it came out in the Italian edition. He thanks her at the back of the book and says that Sophie Hughes wrote the book as much as he did. The book is a satirical novel about a millennial couple, and it's written in a form I've not really encountered much. It's written in the they form mostly. Now the couple are called Anna and Tom, but a large amount of the time it talks about they would do this, they would do that. They're a kind of unit, and this they form also is a description of the people of their generation, their particular social class, their demographic. Anna and Tom moved to Berlin in the early 2000s, and they work in design. They work from home, they work on their laptops. They define themselves very much by the environment that they're in and that they create around them, but even more than that, by the presentation of their environment online. So the book opens with a description of their apartment, the pristine aesthetic perfection of their apartment as it is when photographed and described on a website that they use for subletting it. This opening chapter sets up a major theme of the book, which is the mismatch between life as it is experienced and life as it is mediated through the internet, particularly as it was mediated through the internet between perhaps 2006 and approximately 2020. What the book is really describing is how, for a particular generation, the internet as a mode of understanding yourself colonized real life and became primary. So the simulacra became almost more relevant, more real than the actual day-to-day lived experience, and people, Anna and Tom in this novel being examples, yearn for the imagined version of their life that is presented through social media. The way that the internet is described in this book is actually one of its strongest points. I'll read a short section of the book. They would find themselves utterly mesmerized by the apartment, kale salad, or kitten of someone living 2 blocks or 2 continents away. They would get worked up about silly fights between strangers. They would show a fervent interest in the affairs of people they would never meet. It was like walking through the world's most hectic street market on cocaine. It was like channel hopping an entire wall of TV sets. It was like telepathically tuning into the thoughts of a stadium packed with people. But really, it wasn't like anything else because it was new. Although Anna and Tom are satirical figures in the novel and are supposed to represent a particular type of shallowness of the generation of millennials who are living a performance to themselves, yearning for the life that they've imagined and failing to really experience things from moment to moment. The book is also in some ways nostalgic to read because it's nostalgic for a moment in history where the internet actually felt like something important instead of like a constantly degrading nightmare. This is a time where the internet still felt seductive. It still felt like something new was happening. It still felt like it might in some way be enriching our lives rather than sucking our energy. And it's a time when people saw one another on social media, where Twitter was still a major news source, where Instagram showed you your friends' posts instead of an endless stream of algorithmic garbage, and where Facebook wasn't just a graveyard where your boomer uncle is posting racist memes. It's also about how the culture of the early 21st century creates life as a kind of performance, and this is nowhere more evident than in the sections about politics and the sections about sex. Now, the section about sex reminds me of what Slavoj Žižek once said, which was that in the 20th century, people went to therapists because they were unfaithful, or because they were indulging in taboo fetishes that they were ashamed of. Whereas in the 21st century, people went to their therapists to share their neurosis about being too vanilla. They felt that they weren't indulging enough in the multimodal, polyperverse pleasures of the world. They were dissatisfied with their monogamous partner and felt like they should be experimenting more. And in this book, the couple, Anna and Tom, they have something very special. They have a very supportive, loving, and sympathetic relationship where they have sex regularly, even though it's not necessarily particularly exciting or unusual sex for them. But they feel that they should be maybe experimenting with polyamory. They go to clubs to meet other couples, but they never are able to quite take the plunge. They buy the toys that are marketed to them online, but they just feel uncomfortable and awkward when they use them. They're not able to accept or to cherish the normal human joys of their relationship because they're being bombarded with what is essentially a type of cultural consumerism. The section on politics is a little more scathing. It's also a challenge, I think, to readers of my generation who many of us have very clear political ideological stances, which we can express in conversation, which I can talk about here on my YouTube channel, which people post online, they like and share, they maybe sign petitions. And Tom and Anna know how they feel about the proposed development of the area that they live in Berlin. They know how they feel about multiculturalism. They know how they feel about immigration. But when the refugee crisis occurs in the second decade of the 21st century, they try to involve themselves, and they find that none of these things are really activism. And when it comes to actual on the ground activism, they don't know what to do and they don't have much to offer. And they try to volunteer, but really they realize that they're not actually benefiting anybody except from themselves in their particular performance of helping. I think in later years, many of us have been confronted with this as the political situation in our various countries has become increasingly dire. What we say to one another, what we post on the internet, is not really activism. What we do on the ground is a lot more difficult to assess or to put into practice for many of us. One thing I will say about this book is that Anna and Tom are of a particular kind of social group among millennials. They are people who participate in these kind of new industries of kind of digital design, web design, the internet. Their friends are kind of all based around the same type of work. They are largely immigrants within Europe. They're part of a wave of gentrification within Berlin. And as the book points out, gentrification is a word that only really the people who actually do it use. And they criticize it at the same time as they are participant. You know, the book describes a community, a group of people who don't know anybody with an actual trade. You know, there are no teachers, there are no bakers among them. And the blurb, you know, the people writing the blurbs on the book are all like talking about, you know, this book really skewers our generation. This is us. And I think to myself, yeah, many of us can probably recognize some part of ourselves or some people we've known. You know, I lived in London in the same period, and London was sort of like losing a lot of its so-called creatives to Berlin at the time. But most of us, I think, do not really belong to that particular group or class of people. It was a phenomenon that kind of grew up within that period and that many people participated in, including journalists or the type of people who review novels, but not necessarily an entire generation. You know, many people did other types of work, they had other types of experiences. So I think it would be an exaggeration to say that this is a kind of description of a zeitgeist in the way that maybe Annie Ernaux's book Years is, but it's still very insightful, it's still very interesting, and in the way that it plays with this form, describing this couple's movement across almost 20 years and the development of culture through that time. It's something to experience for sure. So those are my thoughts about Perfection. I think it was nominated for the International Booker or something, so you may have heard of it. If you've read it, let me know what you think. If this video made you think about anything else that you might like to share, as usual, I would love to hear from you in the comments. It always helps me out if you like the video. Other people then get to see it, and I thank you very much for listening. See you again soon.